see. Do we have a quorum? There's
Yes.
Todd, Emily, Tyler's here, Scott's here, Steve's here. Is Mark here or Senator Thatcher or Michael?
This is Michael. I'm here.
You're here. Okay, great. I just couldn't see you on the list. And Mark Landauer, are you here? No. Okay. Well, I think he's coming since he shared some thoughts on that are posted on the website. So recording is started. Okay, so let's get going. Welcome everybody to the PRAC Legislative Subcommittee meeting of September 7th, 2002. I'm going to just read the agenda real quickly so people who don't have access can hear it, and then I have actually a couple things I want to change in it, and then we'll go ahead. But the current agenda is approve the agenda. Acknowledge asking Senator Thatcher to enter a placeholder bill by September 23rd, 2020 deadline. The language to be determined by the committee chair and vice chair in consultation with subcommittee members. That would be subcommittee chair. Then the meat of the discussion today, discussion of categories, both categories of type of work to fill records requests that agencies can charge for, and categories of requester and charging by categories of requesters. We've got 2 questions I'd love us to try to make some progress on this meeting. Should the proposed legislation include identifying and defining what may be charged for as only search, review, and duplication? And should the proposed legislation apply fees based on the category of requester, generally following a modified federal FOIA model? Right now with the categories commercial, educational, non-commercial, scientific, so educational, non-commercial, scientific, news media, other public interests in general, possibly adding a category of individual for their own records as not having fees. We'll have some time for public comment. We'll just write down record the areas of agreement that we have, and we'll identify the next area of the legislative concept that we'll address in our 9/16 meeting. So the one thing I want to change with this agenda is, first, I do want to revisit the calendar, because Todd has now noted that he can't attend the 9/16 meeting. So I just wanted to open up the calendar again and see if we can find something else that week. So that's a new agenda item I'd like to add briefly. And then I would like to add returning to the items that we found agreement on last time, because Mark had posted some comments that I think will enable us to finish those off more strongly. Welcome, Mark. See you here. So those are 2 things I'd like to add to the agenda. Anybody else have amendments they want to suggest for this agenda?
Emily, I had mentioned in the email that I shared a suggestion on dealing with costs as well. I don't know whether that is a separate item to discuss or not. And I certainly don't need to necessarily discuss that suggestion today, but I would like it to be considered at some point for future discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the discussion where you were talking about. I mean, I'm just going to pull those comments up. They're posted on the PRAC website. But I think the part that you shared in your comments that wasn't addressing the items that we agreed on last time, it fits into this discussion we're having today about whether we should whether the categories of what we can charge for should just be search, review, and duplication. I think that that's what you're talking about, the
Yes.
language you suggested about staff time and what it can charge for.
Precisely.
Yeah, that fits into the conversation that we're having today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm glad you got back to us with language. So thank you. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this agenda? Okay, so with those revisions, I suggested kind of a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, and
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay,
Aye.
great. Okay, so the first item of agenda is on the agenda then is to try to find a new meeting date for the week of September 16th. That was a tough week. Todd, you're going to be on an airplane, so you'd be completely unable to come to that meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry about that. I got my dates wrong.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So we have right now the 16th, and I don't have the list right in front of me. Do we have one the following week? No, that's because that's legislative days, right? That week of the September 19th. So,
Yeah, the next one's the 27th.
So is there another day that week of September 12th, which is next week, that we might be able to find a time that, I mean, I know we'll have a quorum without you, Todd, but it'd be the more people we can actually have, the better. Like when we look at the 15th, I know we went through some of this last week, but is Thursday the 15th a day that would be
I would be unable to attend the 15th. I don't want that to bar the council from the subcommittee from meeting, but I have an all-day event on the 15th.
Yeah, Scott was also shaking his head. And I appreciate that. And we can certainly go ahead without one member, Todd, that's fine. If we can find a time when everybody can be here, that'd be great. 14th, is that a possibility for people? Okay, I see a yes from Steve. I see a yes from Mark. Yes from
Michael. I actually have all-day event that goes on the 14th and the 15th, so both of those days are kind of out for me. But like Mark, I definitely, if the best we can do is one absence, you guys should go with that.
Okay. How about the 13th, which is
That wouldn't
really soon?
I'm headed out of town that day for the conference.
So you're traveling on your way there?
Yeah.
Okay. And the 12th?
12th won't work for me.
What about the 19th and 20th, Emily?
Are those is that not too busy for the lobbyists for you guys?
Day before, Monday the 19th would work for me, and as would the 20th.
Okay. Anybody else? Those days work for me.
I'm going to be out of town those days.
Both of those days. And Tyler, you too?
I'm gone on the 19th. I could squeeze something in the afternoon of the 20th, maybe.
Okay. I think we're gonna.
I'll be sailing down the Columbia River both of those days. So.
Okay, so let's we're gonna meet on your boat or whatever you're on, log, barge, I don't know. I think we're gonna stick with the 16th then. We are gonna be missing one person only, and unfortunately it's Todd, but
Actually, you'll likely be missing me as well. I have a all-day event that day on the 16th as well, Emily. So, again, like I said, if you've got a critical mass, I can miss, but I will be I will be absent on the 16th as well. Forgive me.
Can we confirm what I have a couple of stacked. I think I have the old calendar invites and the new ones. What's the actual time slot that we're meeting?
our actual time slot that
The 16th is 2:30 to 4.
2:30 to 4.
2:30 to 4. Did we completely scrap the recurring, like every 3 weeks thing?
I canceled the ones occurring during this period and replaced them with invites for the 5 new ones we chose. I think they're probably still on our calendar for every 3 weeks after that.
Oh, okay.
but our goal was to get some draft legislation done by the middle of October, end of October, something like that. Speed it up. Although since it's clear that we're going to need to do a placeholder bill, we're going to have to fill that in later anyway, so maybe we'll revise that. Let's at this point go ahead with the 16th and let's see how far we get today, and just hesitant to like, hey, we agree on this when there are subcommittee members absent, but let's go ahead with the 16th at this point.
And Emily, just so you know, from an administrative standpoint, Yufeng will be available to record the meeting and then get the video rendered afterwards. You don't have to worry about that part.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Yufeng. Okay, great. So the second thing I wanted to add, well, before this, I wanted to just go through this process with Senator Thatcher. So we will be asking Senator Thatcher, thank you again, Senator, to enter a placeholder bill by September 23rd. So I'd hoped that by the 16th we could sketch out some language that had some decent ideas in there for her to get in, so it wasn't like a completely blank bill. But that's the plan, to do that, and then we'll have to revise it later and work it through the process that draft bills have to go through. But I think that's pretty straightforward, unless anybody has something to add to that or clarify, enlighten, etc.
Actually, Emily, could we ask Mark and or Tyler about placeholder bills? Because I thought they really were supposed to be pretty generic, and maybe we wouldn't want to put anything too specific yet. But I'd love to hear what they have to say about that.
Yeah, sure. I have been in communication with the senator and with the Legislative Counsel's office to understand that process better myself, but I would love the experience of Tyler, Scott, Emily, Mark, anyone who's done this before.
Well, I think Tyler will appreciate this example. Every session, at least in the last 3 long sessions, I've witnessed at least 12 bills being introduced to study speed bumps with a relating clause that says related to transportation. Well, one of those bills actually became the Columbia River Crossing Bill. So I've never seen a bill that has passed the legislature to study speed bumps. The point is that that is a placeholder bill for new ideas to come along during session. And because of the broad relating clause, they can dump just about anything and everything related to transportation into what we call a speed bump study bill. That is the concept as an example. Tyler, you want to add anything to that?
I think regardless, we're going to have, I think we don't have a final language ready to go, and we will not by the 23rd is my estimation of this group. So to Mark's point, I think the question before us is how narrow of a relating to clause do we want on this bill? Because if we put something out there that says relating to public records, you can fit a ton of different ideas, and it's fair game for anybody to put any amendment they want once it's out there. Whereas if we were to say relating to public records fees or relating to public records retention policies, or, if we put more sideboards on it, that would help mitigate against, some
shenanigans,
stuffing it with something that suddenly it's, it's no longer the PRAC bill. That being said, you could just do a bill that said relating to public records, and the content of it at this point is, the Legislative Policy and Research Office will study and make recommendations, and that's pretty standard. And I was under the impression that that was sort of the route that we were going, was a very generic placeholder bill at this point.
Yeah, I got the impression from that the more specific, as you put it, guardrails you could put on early on, the better. So was aiming to work towards some of that, and I mean we've already agreed to move some things out of the bill because they don't relate to fees, so that seems like a real natural. So that I trying to make it the best we can on focusing on what we actually want to do, I think would be where we'd want to go, and not be too broad of a relating clause. But that does ease the effort to try to get some actual language done. So that's fine.
The downside, of course, in putting a more narrow relating clause is that it limits the ability of us to necessarily fit something into that relating clause. So in Tyler's example, where you would do related to public record fees, if we were to do or want to do anything that goes beyond what Legislative Counsel, and I noticed that Miles Cameron, I think, was on. He can probably give us a better idea about, what legislative council would consider to be fit within that versus what probably wouldn't in advance. So that's the challenge I think that we as a subcommittee sort of face here is, do we want to limit our ability to amend this particular bill? I know that our focus has been trying to deal with fees. So you could use Tyler's relating clause, as he suggests, as related to public record fees, but anything that would fall out of that funnel, if you will, would not be allowed to be attached to this bill. And so it's a delicate dance, if you will. And I don't have any really strong preference, although I do believe that having a more narrow relating to clause driving at what we're trying to get at is probably preferable, but that also limits our ability as a council to throw in other potential ideas, right? And so the danger is, if you have a broad relating to clause, as Tyler mentioned, anybody with anything related to public records could potentially try to amend the bill, potentially even with what we like to call a poison pill. So it does create the ability for shenanigans to occur, but again, it also gives you the greatest amount of flexibility.
Yeah, it is. I appreciate that, Mark. It is a delicate dance. And so we can come to that at the next meeting, but appreciate having all that background. So then moving on from that, I want to return to the things that we agreed on, to just sort of finish them off.
Emily, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that this is important because I did listen to the previous meeting, and one of the agreements that I believe you reached was a requirement to post all public record policies.
Mark, can I just, excuse me for interrupting? I was about to get there, so you don't actually have to interrupt to get to where you want to be. That's the next item that I just put on the agenda.
Well, it still relates to the relating to clause discussion that I was getting towards. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you all in your previous meeting agreed to require, or the concept to require all public bodies to post their policies and their cost methodologies on an internet if they have an internet. And my plea was, of course, to include posting it on an area that's open and available to the public or made available upon request for the 300 or so members that I have who have no internet presence whatsoever, as Mr. Crone had mentioned in the previous meeting. My question, though, to Miles would be, if we had a relating to clause that said related to public record fees, would that concept fit in? Because you're dealing with a policy that you need to have posted or made available. The only reason why I think it would fit is because if you don't have it posted, you can't charge fees. But that's a question for legislative council. Can you do that, at least initially, under your view, Miles? Whether we could do something like that with a relating to clause that's limited to public record fees. Sorry, this is detailed, but it's an important question because it will lead us to what type of relating clause we're going to have.
Miles, I don't know if you can do a legal opinion off the cuff like that, but you're welcome to.
Nope.
If you'd like.
Not a chance. No, generally, if it's related to fees, something a prerequisite for a fee, and you say that it's related to fees, that should count. But there's no way I can give a legal opinion on whether that's a complex issue that has Supreme Court precedent. It's way too much for me to give a kind of legal opinion. But the general rule is if it's a prerequisite or if it's part of how you do fees, and you say relating to fees, then that generally wouldn't be included. paying for things is usually generally included in the doing the thing. I mean, it's not real tight, but at the same time, if you have to put in an and, nope, it doesn't work anymore.
So this is Michael. I guess what I'm willing to do is to frame the argument that I would make in support of why it's okay, which is the requirement to post your policy publicly already exists. So the only change we would actually be making is directly related to fees, which is if you don't do so, you cannot charge your fees. And I guess there would be a little clarification, but I'd be very comfortable making that argument in defense of this law should someone challenge it ultimately.
Yeah, Mike.
We agree on this, then we could put this into the draft that we would submit to the Legislative Council as well. So that the language that we agree on now could be part of the placeholder bill that we put in. Todd, you have your hand up.
Yes, well, since we're spitballing ideas, I would suggest something along the lines of related to the way state and local public bodies calculate and recoup costs for providing public records.
I liked Scott's better. Relating to public records fees. It's so simple. And you know, we may want to talk about like fee waivers, which doesn't necessarily fit into the precise formulation you just gave. So I feel like it's a trap to get too specific. I agree it's a delicate dance, Mark, but we want enough leeway to do things that we maybe even haven't thought of yet.
So there's two things we could do today. And Miles, thank you very much for contributing your view. We could continue this discussion and try to make that a priority for this meeting, coming up with some language to be the placeholder language, and try to finish that in a set period of time and then move on to the other things we wanted to talk about today. Or we could set this aside to the 16th and then make that the priority of the meeting. So I'd love to take a straw poll on what people want to do after. Mark, you have your hand raised.
Well, my strong preference is to get through the work that we have ahead of us. I think that we can revisit the relating to clause question at our next meeting. I think we have a lot of material to get through, and my preference would be to try to get through it. Thank you.
Okay. Can I get a straw poll on what people want to do with the agenda here? So Steve, you're in agreement with continuing with what was originally on the agenda. Todd, where are you? Yes, you want to do that. Tyler, how about you? You want to continue with the agenda? Scott, how about you? Okay, Emily? Can't see. There we go. Michael?
Yeah, same.
Okay, great. So we'll set that aside, and it's great to get this input to help frame that discussion. Thank you, everybody. So what we've got on this agenda with the amended agenda that's not written down anywhere, but is we can finish off and tighten these, fully approve the things we approved last time. There were two things that we approved. If you have your public records cost reform draft revision in front of you, one is at the bottom of page 13, expanding the, this is what Mark was referring to, expanding the current law to include a public body must post their public records policy on their website if they have one, in another public manner if they don't, and provide it upon request, adding in that a public body is not permitted to recoup costs from a requester if the amount of and the manner calculating the fees is not in the policy and the policy is not posted. It includes a grace period for education. So obviously that's not the final language, but Mark, there were some amendments you wanted to make to that, some more specific language to just to take into account the agencies who don't have the internet. Yeah, and I realize that this is, Michael sort of mentioned this in the previous meeting, but I do have a membership that exceeds 950 districts across the state of Oregon. About 1/3 of those do not have an internet presence. And so needless to say,
that would put them, those that do not have internet, posting of their policy and methodology into a somewhat of a catch-22. As a result, I would hope that folks can see their way to recognizing that challenge and allowing those local bodies that do not have an internet service or presence for whatever reason to be able to post the material either in a place that is accessible and open to the public where that public body exists, or makes that material available to requesters upon their request. I think that this is, I don't like creating new potential penalties for existing government entities, but this has been a long-standing policy of the state. I firmly believe that you should be following the law to the best of your abilities, and if you're not doing so, then there should be some consequence. And so I'm comfortable with this, provided that the suggested language that I've mentioned here is adopted into that type of a proposal. And that's really all I had to say about that.
Excellent, thank you. I think if you can see the screen I'm sharing now, the blue highlighted is the area that we agreed on. I've crossed off in another public manner if they don't, and put in highlighting. I've changed one word. You wrote that they either are posted at a physical location open and available to public or made available upon request. I've made that or an and, but otherwise, and clarified that it would be including in response to public records requests, which I think I just heard you say. But if you guys want to take a look at that and see if that's acceptable language.
Emily, the only challenge with that and is that there may not be a space that is open and available to the public. Okay, I have one particular district that I can think of in Multnomah County. It's a drainage district that is completely fenced and is not open to the public for security, for very good reasons. Okay. I do think an or there is probably a better solution in those situations where there is not a place that is available to the public. And so I just make that a small request.
What if we just do it like if such a space is available? Because yeah, I hear you.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I think if it said, this is Michael, sorry. I think if it said in a publicly available place, if possible and otherwise, and I would actually sort of, I guess, advocate for getting rid of the addition about a public records request. I think the last thing we want is to make people make public records requests for the public records request policy. I think just leaving it with, they have to make it available upon request makes more sense to me.
Oh, you know what I was trying to get at there is like, if you make a public records request, then like automatically you get the fee policy back with it. That's, I guess, what I was sort of trying to imagine the scenario where would there be a situation where, okay, you've got your records thing posted. I'm asking for records. I didn't ask for the fee thing, but I haven't, the fee, policy, but I actually haven't been to the physical space. And so I make a records request and I don't see the policy. It just seems like a real gray area of like, would they be able to charge for the records then? I mean, I think this is probably a really extreme situation. But so I guess what I was trying to, in that situation, imagine, well, the easiest thing to be is like in your first response to the records request, just, by the way, here's our policy. That's what I was trying to get at, if that makes sense, or if that fits into and being a reasonable situation. Okay, Todd, sorry, I was going to see your hands in it. Go ahead.
That's okay. Oh, and I'm just going to say as vice chair, if you have your microphone open but aren't speaking, please mute yourself at this time. Not you, Emily, but I hear some background noise from somebody. I was going to say, Emily, I do think adding in response to public records requests is confusing here and is a separate issue, especially because we're saying if you don't have a publicly posted policy that includes the way you calculate fees, you can't charge fees. So I think we're covering our bases anyway. And if I could just make one other suggestion, I think some of the concerns that Mark has, and I could be wrong, is just due to the fact that I kind of wrote this in an inartful way to begin with, because I didn't actually mean to say, like, post it on your website is the public way. I meant to say, kind of parroting the language that exists, that a public body shall make available to the public a written procedure, et cetera, and then say, including but not limited to, you must put it on your website if you have it. So I didn't mean to make a website like the main thrust of what it means to post it publicly. I just meant to make that a requirement if it exists, but there could be other ways to post it publicly, which is kind of what we're doing. But I'm wondering if there's a different way to present this, like an including but not limited to type of clause.
I personally think we have the basis covered in the language that's outlined here, but you know, I'm open to any further suggestions. I just don't just make it easy and simple for people to follow, and I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, this
Yeah, I agree with Mark. I think, oh, go ahead, sorry. Anna.
just that this language is clearly not that fine. Like what we, you know, it says add that a public body include a education grace period. I mean, this isn't like the bill language yet, but the ideas I think we were agreeing on. Yeah. Sorry, Michael, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to add to that?
No, I agree that we're in a good enough place. I'm sure there are better ways we could say it than what's written here, but I think this is good enough for now.
Okay, Scott?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm agreeing. I think we're in a good space. I might suggest adding an or, though. Is our intent that people will post it obviously everywhere, make it most accessible, but if a city has a website, do we want it on their website and in a publicly available space? Because I can see some concern with city hall lobbies and libraries getting cluttered with things that few people actually look at in paper, and then we'd have to update it if the fee, when the fee scheduled. So if I could suggest on the website if they have one or posted, and I like keeping the idea of the and making available upon request, but making it clear that we're not saying you have to do necessarily both.
Well, I think what we want is, though, that it is on your website if you have a website. Like, I think that's an actual problem right now.
Sure.
So would it be more like on their website if they have one, and if not, that sort of thing?
And if not, it's fine. I just want to make sure that I can, you know,
Yes.
we're not requiring both for necessarily. With the conversation we're having about, for example, these are the following options you can have. Just wanted to add the flexibility in.
Yes, that great. Thank you. I didn't realize that was not clear, and you're absolutely right. This helps. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're all on board more thoroughly than last time, since we're a fuller body now for that page 13. Does anybody disagree with that? Hearing no objections, we're going to go on to the next thing we agreed on, which was, what was that, the second thing? Sorry, let's see. Where's my other blue? Yeah, okay. Page, top of page 11 in this document. Oh, for each category of records response preparation. So the search, duplicate, and review is what we're going to talk about today, but the public body must utilize the lowest class and comp staff member available of processing request. So that the lowest compensated staff member that's all this is intended to really be expressing agreement on. Because we're going to talk about the rest of it before. But again, this was supportive of current law. So is there anyone who wants to reopen that discussion of you?
This is Michael. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tyler. You got your hand up politely.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I just wanted to flag, yeah, we have agreed to this. I'm just looking at this actual language in front of us, and I'm wondering if it doesn't presuppose that we're categorizing requests. since it calls out search, duplication, and review. And that seems like what we were going to discuss after getting through this. So yes, the spirit of this is correct. I just want to make sure that if we wouldn't want to put something in statute that if we decide as a body to reject, categorize or explicitly spelling these out, because we talked about search, duplication, and review at our last meeting, and I don't think there was broad agreement that we wanted to go that way, or at least we just needed further discussion on it.
What if we said each step for now, each step or element of a records response?
That would work for me. And then cut out the reference to search, duplication, and review.
Yeah, this is Michael. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So I agree with that comment, Tyler. I was also just going to point out two, I think, very minor things about this language. One is, I think it's weird to talk about class. Really, I think we can just talk about the lowest compensated or at the lowest hourly rate. And the other is, I think that what's really important is that that's the rate that public bodies should be allowed to charge, and not necessarily that they should or need to actually use that person if someone else is more available to do it. That just should be what the cost any cost passed on to the requester should be based on that. I don't think we need to actually regulate who public bodies decide to use.
So looking at this now, crossed off category and put in step, crossed out the search, duplicate, and review, and left in the word capable of processing a request using the lowest hourly rate of a staff member capable of processing the request. Does that language that we all agree on? Mark, you have your hand up.
So my concern with this one, folks, is pretty straightforward as well. And I mentioned it in my email that I sent yesterday. And that is that I've got a large number of districts that are entirely run by volunteers. And as a result, the lowest paid category of worker is 0, right? And frankly, that's probably not a tenable situation for them. What I would like to suggest for this is when you have a government body that is utilizing volunteers, that the Oregon's minimum wage for that area is the salary that is used. And I hope that makes sense to folks.
So I'm just pulling over the language that you put in your comments that is relevant to this specifically. Just a little bit more, because you had also included regular hour pay without consideration of public bodies' other employment-related costs. But I think that was something that, if I remember right, Scott, you wanted some more clarification on, and that was maybe something we wanted to discuss. So I guess I would suggest at this point, seeking, just to see if we can agree on this lowest hourly rate thing, we would cross off that part for future discussion, but and then put in the unpaid volunteers language. What does that look like to people? Again, seeking what we can agree on right now. So we agree on using the lowest hourly rate of people capable, and then if volunteers.
So Emily, I think the sort of thing I'm nitpicking on here is maybe this, as I read it, says for each step of records response preparation, the public body must utilize the lowest hourly rate of staff member. I think it should just say must charge for. Actually, it shouldn't be must anyway, right? May. Oh, right. May not charge more than. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then you needed that, but.
Thank you. Okay, and then this volunteer part, if unpaid volunteers are available, I mean, that's an interesting word, because I don't know if agencies get people that like to volunteer, like, staffed agencies. Like there are people who volunteer with police, organizations, police agencies, for example, or other things. But if unpaid volunteers are available or necessary to respond to records requests, then should it be, they may establish a fee for the time spent at an hourly rate not to exceed the then applicable minimum hour wage in the state of Oregon. I think I have two questions here. One is the available and necessary part, and one is since the hourly wage is different in different parts of the state, then probably it should be relative to where they are, right?
Yes, that was the concept. I don't know if the are available or necessary is necessary to this paragraph. I think that if you're using an unpaid volunteer to respond to requests, you're allowed to use the minimum wage. That's the point that I think I'm trying to get across here. And so that are available or necessary is sort of extraneous here and probably not necessary.
So I have to say, this is, to me, feels very like we're suddenly afield from the idea, we're even further afield, let me say, from the idea of actual costs, right? When we talk about charging a public records requester for something that is not even arguably a cost of the public body, like that feels to me like a very, I mean, I understand the impulse and I get the issue in the context of other conversations we've had, but I'm a little bit uncertain about going there.
Because there is no cost at the moment? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're certainly inventing a cost for the first time. Like, I'm not aware of another. The idea that there's no cost to a volunteer's time is probably false, right? But we would be specifically inventing a cost for the first time, and I don't know that. I feel like we should be cognizant that we would be changing the sort of actual cost requirement of the public records law in this narrow circumstance, and think about that a little bit.
Well, I would remind folks, and not to push back, Michael, but I think we all acknowledge that there is a cost to government to produce public records, right? And whether it's from a volunteer or a paid staff person, if it's a volunteer, producing the public records is potentially distracting them from doing their core service work. There is a cost to the public for that. And I don't believe that if a government is purely stood up and run by volunteers, that they should not be allowed to charge for public records just as every other public body would if they have paid staff. And so I get I get the thread that you're concerned about, but I think we're chasing ghosts here, and would really probably have to insist on this because, again, believe it or not, approximately a third of my membership is based on purely a voluntary basis.
Can I ask you, Mark, how they're dealing with this now? Because like Emily said in the sort of introduction of this topic, this is based on a very direct Court of Appeals decision in the case involving OHSU. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, this is the current law, and your clients must be doing something to comply with it or work with it, and I guess I'm curious what that is.
Well, let's have a bit of a reality check here, folks. Most of these really small districts aren't necessarily fielding a lot of public records requests, right? What they are currently doing, Michael, I couldn't tell you. I'd have to call and do a survey and find out. I suspect, though, that they are probably in the rare instances where they're getting public records requests that are somewhat substantial and involved. They're charging something. But I, again, acknowledge the fact that probably the vast majority of these districts that are being run by volunteers are not getting many public records requests in the first place. So it's just difficult for me to say. What I'm trying to do, though, is prevent them from, frankly, losing some of their service capacity. And you know what I'm trying to do here, so I don't need to explain myself.
Emily? You had your hand up. Go ahead.
My bigger concern with this would just be in making sure that and I'm not sure whether this would do that, but making sure that it's not implying that unpaid volunteers could or should be used. Like if there were, I mean, it does say, capable of completing the request, but like you can certainly imagine that unpaid volunteers might not be qualified to complete the request, and or that you might need to hire counsel to help you review a request or something like that, that like just because a district, even if it was exclusively unpaid volunteers, you might have to hire somebody to help you with a request.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Is there somebody else with their hand up? I don't think so. No. Okay. I see hands. Let me just see. Sorry. Okay. I mean, the law says the public body can establish fees to reimburse the public body. So it does seem like it would be creating something. I guess what I'm getting at is this: we don't have agreement on this. So this wouldn't be something that we could say, okay, we agree on this today. I would set it aside to possibly return to later. But Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna, this is an important discussion. I wanted to point out that we're more than halfway through the meeting time. And I think on this item, I agree with Michael. It's like it's creating a fee where one does not exist now, which I don't love. I also feel like it's a pretty rare circumstance. And, if this were the only thing that we were putting forward in a bill, then I would say no. But my hope is that we'll have some more substantive wins that will outweigh it in the end.
Okay. Well, I think that I think we should keep it in here as something to discuss. But I think if I'm looking right now for things we actually fully agree on, so we can get to what we wanted to really talk about today. So I'm going to save this in the bill and not cite it as something we actually agree on today. Sorry, Todd, go ahead.
Well, I'm fine doing that. I'm just wondering if I can suggest language that might be satisfactory to Mark and the group, but I don't know. Well, first of all, instead of saying if unpaid volunteers are used, what if we say if only unpaid volunteers are available? Because wouldn't that satisfy the notion that most public bodies have paid employees? So that would be one suggestion. And then the other is, what if we left it slightly more ambiguous? Because yes, Mark, I assume you're presuming that these public bodies that only have volunteers are somehow justifying recouping whatever costs they believe exist for providing records now, even though they don't have paid employees. So what if we use language along the lines of, and it might have just went out of my head, but I'm going to try to say it, or something like, for public bodies that are staffed only by unpaid volunteers, they may establish fees reasonably calculated to reimburse that public body for the actual cost of making public records available without then setting an amount. It leaves them within the current confines of the law, allows them to continue perhaps justifying recouping costs the way they do now, or, gives them a moment to reflect and determine if they're actually doing that appropriately under the law. But we're not being so specific that we are establishing the new fee, because I'll be honest, I'm not comfortable with that, even though I understand Mark's reasoning behind trying to do it. So go ahead, that's along the lines of what I was thinking.
all I'm trying to do, folks, is clarify in statute here for these districts that do rely on volunteers, what they may and may not do.
Yeah.
Rather than having to reach out to an attorney every damn time they get a public records request asking, okay, how do I do this? Because all my staff are volunteers. This is what I'm trying to address. If you have a better way to skin the kitty cat, I'm all for it. But
Mark,
go ahead.
Question. What I just heard you say was that you have situations where agencies that are staffed only by volunteers call an attorney because they don't know how to respond to a public records request. But
They don't know how to calculate the charges, Emily. They don't know how to calculate the charge.
Okay, so
what I'm trying to do is give them the pathway to the point where they don't have to call an attorney every time to figure out how they charge and try to recoup reasonable fees.
Okay, so the reasonable is the question you'd turn to an attorney for. So this puts what I've just sketched out in the language kind of uses some of Todd's language to clarify exactly what agencies we're talking about, and then returns to your language about an hourly wage. How does that look to two of you? Todd and Mark. Miles says in the chat, volunteers are not employees. They can't be the lowest class employees. So then we would this says for public bodies that are staffed only by unpaid volunteers, they may establish fees for the time spent at an hourly rate not to exceed the then applicable minimum hourly wage, local hourly wage. So that I think that fits with, I think Miles' concern is not applicable in that language. People's responses to this?
That would work for me. Thank you.
Just a question, Mark. Would they still then be able to charge the attorney hourly rate too that did the work on helping them figure out what is reasonable?
Well, reasonable's not in here anymore.
Well, actual cost, sorry.
Go ahead. Could you say the question again, Todd? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Would they be able to charge the attorney's time in answering their legal questions about this?
You already can't charge for time you spend asking an attorney how much you can charge.
You could.
Well,
yeah.
I thought it was you can't charge for determining which exemptions apply. Only
that's right,
exemptions.
Todd. You are correct. You can charge for the time to redact, but you cannot charge for the time spent determining whether something is or is not disclosable.
Right, and you definitely can't charge someone to talk to a lawyer about how much you can charge them. Like, no, that's not a permissible charge.
Agreed.
So, Todd, are you questioning whether that should be spelled out if we keep this kind of language in this section of the draft bill?
Probably, just for clarity purposes.
I mean, this is getting a little
deep.
Yeah, more than I expected. And Mark, I still just don't understand how public bodies that only have volunteers are currently recouping their costs if they don't have hourly FTEs to pay for. Is it possible, just as a suggestion, we table this and Mark attempts to survey his members to get more information and we could return to this issue later if that's possible? So I think it's important to deal with, but I don't know we have all the information to do it today.
And frankly, Todd, I don't know if we'll be able to get the information in a timely fashion. I mean, I certainly can try, but most of my volunteers, guess where they're in right now? They're fighting fires, right? That's the problem. And Michael will remember this very well when we were back talking about timelines, right? Sometimes the light isn't on.
Mark. And I think I agree with what Steve said, right? Which is that this seems like a reasonable thing at the end to include if we have a bill that has some overall wins on public records fee issues, and it's a reasonable way to deal with a difficult situation, and I think maybe we just need to table it to revisit once we've got some of that stuff, because for now it's like it really would be the only substantive change we've agreed on would be to charge fees that are not currently lawful, which feels wrong.
Okay, so I'd like to, as I said, set it aside and keep that language in there as draft stuff, and we can come back to it. So what we really, back to the main point of today's meeting, this discussion of categories. Should proposed legislation include identifying and defining what may be charged for as only search, review, and duplication? So that's one question, separate from the category of requester in my mind, but I'm sure people's like discussions will cross over. So let's start talking about that, and I'll find this relevant part in the draft legislation and call on Steve.
So defining the categories of costs that may be recouped, my understanding it exists already in some case law, or and this is not going to create a major departure from status quo. There's a desire for it because it maybe adds clarity for respondents. I know Michael has argued in the past that maybe it's superfluous. Personally, I don't see it really changing the world one way or another, like from a requester standpoint. So I don't really have any objections to it. I would support it in the name of if it's beneficial to the respondents in terms of giving them greater certainty, then great. I don't really see any downsides to it, but maybe I'm missing something.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Tyler?
Yeah, I think adding greater clarity about what's an actual recoupable cost would help public bodies a great deal. To Mark's point about having to, seek out legal counsel and say, what am I allowed to charge for? I also do think that it will help inadvertently bring down costs, because you'll toss out just completely, pie in the sky. It costs $10,000, deal with it. Like I've said before, I think this would help both the public body and the requesters kind of be speaking the same language. And I continue to see this as akin to an itemized receipt that ends up going to the requester, so you know exactly what you're being charged for. And then ultimately, I think it helps public bodies as well, because you can say, this is our actual cost of complying with this public records request.
Other comments on this?
Well, this is Michael. I think that the current law the statute says that public bodies can charge fees reasonably calculated to recover their actual costs. I work on public records requests, not every day, but certainly every week. The Attorney General of the state, she works on public records requests personally every once in a while, because sometimes people want her emails. She spends some time on it. I spend some time on it. The cost of the DOJ, whether I'm spending time on that request or not, is literally zero, and neither of us ever charges for our time. And whether we would be justified in collecting an hourly fee or not is unclear to me a little bit, actually, under current law. And it's true that this would add some clarity, but the only clarity that it would add is clarity that allows me to collect a fee that currently I'm not sure I'm allowed to collect. And I'm not sure that that's helpful clarity if our goal is to reduce the cost of public records. So that's I guess where I come down is like, we're now saying specifically, even if there's no cost to you, public body, because you're using salaried staff who are working this into their normal business, you can charge the public for the time they spend doing it, even in the cases where it literally can be worked into their workflow. So I felt like it was a useful addition in the context of adopting the FOIA scheme, where we're then limiting what expenses can be charged to public interest requesters and to the general public, because then it served a purpose that seemed more in keeping with our mission, but I guess I'm not persuaded at this point that just saying yes, no matter what, you can charge an hourly rate is a helpful clarification in the law.
Okay, Tyler?
I think to respond to Michael's comments, you know, this would not change. We're not contemplating changing a may to a shall. I think this is just spelling out allowable costs. And I mean, for example, I mean, I think Mark's pointed out, like in his language that he put in there, are we allowed to recoup the fringe benefits that go to the employee? You know, it varies wildly across counties. Some counties will say, no, it's just that hourly rate. Some it's your rate plus your benefits. Having clarity in the law would help everybody understand exactly what we're talking for. And of course, I'm going to be advocating, right, for the full suite of the actual cost, which would include that full suite, regardless of whether we go that route or not. I think especially for smaller bodies where you have your custodian wears 4 different hats, and this might not fit as easily into their realm of everyday duties. And the dollars and the time spent on a public records request are detracting from that person's other duties. Knowing what costs are recoupable would be a huge help. And I don't think that it would create costs where there are none. We'd still leave it at this point discretionary as to whether or not the public body can charge a waiver or not, but they would at least know what they are waiving and the requester would know what they are waiving.
Todd, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't think changing this language to what we have here would in any way require or incentivize public bodies to charge fees that they currently do not. I agree with what Tyler said, that it merely clarifies what they can charge. Also, I would just like to point out, although we haven't discussed it, we still have the language in here that they may charge up to the actual cost as a better reflection of reality, and that public bodies, again, do not have to charge up to the don't have to charge the full actual cost of providing records. I think that's just additional clarification that puts some guardrails around the process. Anytime you can introduce and define terms that both requesters and public bodies can use when talking to each other, you improve the conversation, you eliminate confusion, errors, mistakes, and I think make for a better public records process overall. So I'm very much in favor of keeping these categories as well as the up to actual cost language.
Thank you. Mark?
No, I'm in agreement with Tyler on this. I have to say that I think that this would be although it seems small, this is a big deal in spelling out what you can charge for those public bodies. Again, I have, innumerable districts who occasionally get a public record. First thing they do is call the attorney in downtown Portland, find out, okay, I've got this public record request. What can I charge for and what am I not allowed to? This is all wasted time, right? Wasted time that people could be using to actually get the records compiled, reviewed, and released. I think you're doing a favor with this, not only to the public, but also to the public bodies in clarifying and spelling this stuff out in statute, so people don't have to continue calling their attorneys or their colleagues at other public bodies trying to find out how do you go about doing this.
Thank you, Mark. So there's the main question I'm just hearing back is it seems like everyone's in generally large agreement on this, except for the question of what is the actual cost, whether we would need to further define that to include PERS and stuff like that. And then Michael's general question of whether this by itself as a standalone idea is actually useful. I want to talk a little bit about like this actual cost thing and see if we can define that a little bit better. But I just want to note that this is a theme we have heard a lot in all our discussions and is kind of at the root of it. But the idea that public records isn't a core government function. I thought we'd like generally all acknowledge that it is a core government function, and I totally sympathize with people who are trying to do 5 different jobs. That's not the fault of the public records. Like, that's the fault of the management, the budget, that the reality of dealing with government and having to prioritize. But I just want to return to that, you know, that I thought we'd come to some kind of understanding that this is a core function of government. And I just wanted to raise that again as something, at least I view it that way. And people may disagree, and that's fine. But just hearing a lot that this is something special and different and an unusual kind of service, public service. So just wanted to kind of reset the discussion that way. Tyler, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond directly to that, Emily, because I agree with you. This is nobody's fault. If there's a bad guy I would point to, I could point to Measure 5 and Measure 50 and just the structural constraints on local government budgets. And I thought it was useful. I was talking to one of my counties about this, and they said, look, these public records requests, they go to our public information officer, and when these requests comes in, of course you're responsive because that is your role as government. That's good governance. The reality is, with those constrained resources, the time and the money that gets spent on responding to that public records request is time and money that's away from, for example, getting information about monkeypox out to vulnerable populations in your county. So it's always kind of like what's made of glass and what's made of rubber, and you know, we have a bucket of water to put out a raging wildfire over here. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think on principle, yes, this is a function of good governance. We are just strapped with very structural budget limitations.
Yeah, and I think, as Steve has pointed out, there's the role of a public information officer is to put out what the agency thinks is important. And it's possible you could have a scenario where someone's trying to request records about what the government agency is actually doing about the distributing this monkeypox vaccine. That, you know, I mean, you can't make a blanket statement, I don't think, about which one's necessarily more important. There's so many different variables. But yeah, I very much appreciate what you're saying. The piece on this about the actual cost, do we need to define that further in statute to address the question of the discrepancies between agencies, is where one might charge for, you know, healthcare, retirement, whatever, the whole package that the employee costs versus the hourly wage, the base wage. Does that need to be defined somewhere in this law? If not here, maybe back where we were working a minute ago.
I mean, I would be comfortable excluding it. I feel like the change to include these specific categories without any kind of waivers or anything attached to it is basically adopting a full fee for service model for transparency, which I still don't like. But if we're going to do that, I would definitely be in favor of at least putting the sideboards on that we're really only talking about actual hourly compensation, because just as my hourly compensation doesn't actually vary whether I'm working on a records request or not, it certainly doesn't affect what the public body is paying for my benefits package. And I think some localities even charge like overhead surcharges on top of that, and I would love to put a stop to that practice.
I just pulled over language from Mark's comment that he submitted yesterday that clarifies that. And, you know, hearing your concerns, Michael, about not talking about this in a vacuum, let's leave that actual cost, or whether we need to define it further to gel a little bit. And there's 2 issues you brought up. One is whether you'd agree to this without any waivers built in. And I guess my question back to you would be, like, if we just change this part, then would we just keep the rest of, unless we change the waivers part of the law, just keep the public interest waiver as is? So that's that's a question. I don't know if that's the case, Michael, does that answer your concern?
I mean, not really, right? I think that we're talking about clarifying that public bodies can charge fees that currently they maybe can or maybe can't. And maybe Todd is telling me that I'm wrong and that it would be perfectly fine for me to be billing people at whatever my actual hourly salary is for the time that I'm spending on public records requests, even though it does not create an incremental cost to DOJ. But you know, I'm happy to be outvoted on that issue. What I was really referring to when I referred to waivers was the way that this idea was first introduced by Todd is in the context of proposing FOIA, right? Where only some of these categories that we're defining for the first time can be charged to public interest requesters. And in that context, I think it's a useful construct. Divorced from that, I'm not so sure. But again, I'm happy to be outvoted on that question.
Understood. Let's just take a quick check of people, like how many people want to adopt something like this without necessarily including categories of requesters. So Tyler wants to, Mark wants to, and Todd wants to. Emily, I can't see your response. Did you have a response or a comment? And Scott and Steve, I didn't see yours either.
I feel more neutral on this. I'm fine with this and more concerned about other aspects.
Okay. Scott, Steve?
I basically am with Michael. I mean, I think in the context of further change, it makes sense. Otherwise, like I don't think it gets us very far in addressing a lot of the concerns that were raised in the testimony over the past 6 months.
Okay. Scott?
I think I'm generally neutral on it as well. I'm open to further discussion. I know it'd probably be nice to have consistency across what everyone's doing, but.
Okay. It's pretty even split here. So why don't we move, let's bear in mind everything we've just talked with and where people are landing, and let's talk about categories of requesters.
Emily, if I just interrupt for a second.
Of course, yeah, please.
If we're staying on time, when do you think would be a good time to ask for public testimony?
Well, I'd like to get into this discussion a little bit, but we could take a minute of public testimony now. I think I just see one hand. Are there more people who wanted to talk besides just one?
I mean, presently there's one. Now we have two up. Three.
Oh, three. Hey, open the mic and here they come. Okay, let's take 3 minutes of public testimony. I'm going to run a clock. Sorry, but this is we don't have a lot of time. So Joanne Barker, would you go ahead, please? Joe Barker, if you're talking, you're muted. I'm going to go on to Eric Blaine. Eric?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the earlier conversations was in regard to the charging of different rates for public employees, and there was reference that this was a codification of existing case law. Was that case law in defense of animals versus OHSU?
Yes, I'm seeing Todd nod. It was.
All right. So I have that in front of me. I'm reading what the Court of Appeals said. They said that OHSU did not justify the charging of different rates, but saying that they did not justify it is a far cry, I think, from saying that no one could ever justify it. I wonder if the committee might have some time to reread that case and see if perhaps there might be a different interpretation of what the Court of Appeals actually said.
You have incredible timing because that was 1 minute. I'm going to ask Todd to maybe take a look at that outside, and Michael outside of this meeting, and can come back to us with further information. Thank you, Eric. Mindy Lane, you go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. I just want to start by saying I appreciate the difficult task ahead of you to uh, narrow the information without making it too narrow. I know you have a long road ahead of you. My one comment was about actual costs. Some examples of actual costs that we've incurred for fulfilling public records requests at the Oregon Water Resources Department include physical access fees. For instance, we have records stored at surplus. They charge a fee to remove a pallet from a shelf. And then in another instance, we actually had to, travel, get a motor pool vehicle and travel to an office with a vacant position to review records. So we incurred travel costs, physical access costs, things of that nature. In our at our agency, we err on the side of if we don't know if we can charge it or if we don't know we should, we just don't charge that fee. So we eat the cost. So any guidelines that could be made, I agree with what you all are saying, that would be helpful to both public bodies and to the requesters. So we don't have to ask the same question every time a weird scenario comes up. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Joe Barker? Can you access your microphone, Joe Barker? Okay, Joe, I'm unable to hear you. So if you are able to hear us, please put a comment in the chat and we will try to return to you, but I've been unable to hear you. So thank you, Eric and Mindy, for sticking around and for testifying. And let's see if we can talk a little bit about categories of requesters in the time we have remaining. So this would be a pretty significant change to Oregon law. We've got a lot of comments in here from the members of the committee. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about why you think it's such a good way to go, this modified FOIA?
I think it's helpful in leveling the playing field and making records available to as many people as possible, because even though now the law is kind of agnostic on who gets records in terms of everyone can make a public records request, the ability to pay fees really differentiates amongst those who can and cannot receive them, because a lot of people aren't able to afford the fees. And I don't think at this point we are attempting to eliminate the ability of a public body to recoup its costs entirely. We're just trying to sort of clarify and improve access. Couple that with the existing public interest balancing test that exists in the law that seems to, in that regard, favor certain types of requesters over others, those specifically that can disseminate information that's important to the way the government conducts its business to specific audiences, I think is mirrored in creating these categories of requesters who pay differing amounts to access the same records, but is just in a clearer, more direct way and improves or increases, in my opinion, those who will get these records, because a lot more types of requesters will automatically be paying less, independent of whether or not fee waivers or reductions continue to exist in the law after whatever happens with our concept.
Okay, thanks. Do people have questions, like clarifications they'd really like answered? Because we kind of go to the clarification route, or maybe people are already in agreement on this. I'm interested in seeing, do people generally like this category idea and we should refine it, or is there just a split on the categories in general? Todd, you clearly are generally in favor. Just going around my screen here. Mark, do you have a place you've landed on this?
Sorry, Emily, I was having trouble with my microphone. There's always one of us, so forgive me. I've been thinking long and hard about this, Emily, and I'm just going to be as forthright as I can at this point. I'm still out on a limb, and I want to preface this by saying I'm sort of wearing two hats here, right? As a member of the Public Records Council, that's the role that I'm trying to fill now. In that capacity, it's intriguing. As a member of lobbyist, I think that the categorization idea is going to have a rough time ahead if we were to choose going forward. And the reason I say that is I think that most people are comfortable with their existing processes and systems, and this would be a pretty significant change to Oregon's public records law. Having said that, I don't know where SDAO would fall on this, and I would have to get direction from my board of directors, just like Tyler would with the Oregon Association of Counties. So for me to be able to opine where SDAO would be is beyond my capacity at this point. I think that it would have some political challenges with it, purely from my lobbyist perspective. I'm going to cut to the chase from my perspective. I'm not so sure that I'm going to be supportive of categorization. Having said that, I have a deep amount of sympathy for individuals requesting their own documents with the understanding that there may be some limitations to that. Secondly, I'm having a very difficult time with something I've said before. I believe, and this is me personally, I believe that when the media is requesting information from a public body, there's an inherent public interest. Now, we can talk about who's the media and who's not, and I'm going to avoid that conversation for the time being. Having said that, I do believe that the members of the media do have a public interest, and here's the challenge that I always find, that the statute says the public body may reduce the fine in those instances. Therein is the challenge from my perspective, and I am personally sort of committed to trying to address that for the media. I don't know if we have to go all the way to categorization for the entire public records statute if we would address, in my opinion, the individuals and the media. So that's where I am. It's pretty squishy, Emily. I didn't really answer your question, and that's what a good lobbyist does. But I've told you what areas that I'm interested in trying to tackle. And so I guess I've spoken more than I probably should have at this point.
Thank you, Mark. Steve?
Well, I didn't have my hand up. I do have.
I'm sorry. I'm going around my screen. I realized you hadn't. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Check in with everybody about where.
I mean, because we're running short of time, I don't think we're going to be able to have a full discussion of this, obviously. But so I'll just say, I could speak, I think, in defense of Todd's proposal. I could also argue for why I would like to go much further, further in the sense of treating news media and everybody else in one category. Basically, I think there's a lot of agreement that, you know, among other states we've talked to in FOIA, and I think probably around the table, that commercial requests are fair game. You know, and I would even go so far as to suggest you could consider charging more than actual costs in the case of commercial requesters when we talk about needs for revenues to pay for these unfunded costs. But I think, you know, I think that as I've argued before, I would like to have a discussion, maybe it's at our next meeting, about what would happen if we essentially dispense with the public interest test for news media and the individual requesters, and what actual harm that would do. We've got evidence before us from 3 different states that have taken that approach, that have taken this approach of like duplication only for news media and all other non-commercial requesters, and their finances have not collapsed, and they're all states with less revenue than Oregon's. So I recognize I know what the opinions people have voiced so far, and I know I'm probably a very small minority voice, but I just would like to have that discussion.
If we dispensed of the public interest test for media and non-commercial requesters. Is that what you said?
Emily, can I
Yeah,
ask Steve? question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is like, can you clarify how much more, like, as I read Todd's proposal, media would pay reproduction costs. I don't even know what reproduction costs are in 2022. Like, aren't those basically zero?
Most of the time, presumably any duplication costs would be zero at this point. I mean, there might be a time when someone's digging into an archive and photocopying, but yeah.
So I guess I'm not sure how much further we want to go than zero.
So that's,
I guess I'm not, when I say further, Michael, I don't mean in the sense of like dollar amounts or, I think basically what I'm arguing for is using Todd's structure, but essentially collapsing the categories so that individuals get the same treatment as news media without having to prove public interest.
so accomplishing a similar thing with slightly different approach. Am I understanding you right, Steve?
Yeah, commercials pay full cost, everybody else pays duplication.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We just have about 3 minutes left, so if I can continue around my screen, and feel free to respond to this collapsing idea that Steve has mentioned as well. Emily, do you want to share where you are at this point?
I don't really support the categories as they are with how different groups would be charged. I'm very concerned about the impact that would have on the provision of other public services without funding. And if we were to categorize, I think I would be leaning more towards something like commercial, public interest, general, and records related to the requester.
Scott?
I'm leaning with Emily and Mark on this one. I think the cultural shift this would represent is not going to give us enough time to do this in 2023. I think this would have to be an effort in a separate way. Cities, representing the folks that I do, cities are going to want to talk about it and understand it. I think there's a benefit at the end. I'm not saying we don't work on this. I'm saying I don't think this is going to happen in 2023. I think it's just too big of a shift, and but let's have that conversation. And for this similar reasons, same reasons that Mark and Emily have expressed.
Tyler?
Yeah, I'm going to be in the same place as my public body brethren in this body. We had talked before about how this tiered sort of FOIA model rests on a professionalized public records staff, and that does not currently exist across public bodies in Oregon. So to Scott's point, would love to keep talking about this because I think there's a nugget here. But if we go this route now in 2023, I think we're going to wind up with the bloody fight we had last time about who was media and who was not. And to Scott's comment here, I think we need to be thinking about, that feels like a Band-Aid solution when we could be looking at a much more comprehensive fix on just how we fund public record requests in general. Because I think bucketing people when they come to you with a public records request in some ways does run contrary to the spirit of, we should just have open public record access.
Just, I would love to ask you, Tyler, if the real goal is, better solid funding for public records requests across the board, then is that what we should be writing legislation for this time around? Not, waiting for another couple years, but should we be trying to figure out a different way to fund it in general? And is that what you'd prefer this time around?
I think we're too short in 2023 because that's an enormous, I think, legislative lift. But yeah, permanent ongoing funding is always the mechanism that we're stuck with right now is a fee for service model. There's no getting around it. But we could certainly this body could examine other mechanisms in the future. I think that's a much more comprehensive conversation than we have time to get into in 2023. That's probably like a 2025 type lift.
But there may be some, if that's truly what you truly want to do and it's not kicking the can down the road, then there may be some ways to actually, I wonder if put things in place in 2023 so that would start to happen in 2025. That might be something to think about. Michael, I can't remember if you got a chance to weigh in on the categories generally.
Yeah, you haven't come around to me yet, and I think this is a good idea. I think that it is, as Mark said, a politically difficult one, and I think that the other lobbyists are speaking to that too. And one of the political concerns I have, honestly, is that it feels like an idea that could be attacked sort of sneakily by public bodies attaching a fiscal to the bill. I don't actually believe that a fiscal would really be justified here, because from everything we heard, I do not think that public bodies are generating any meaningful revenue charging public interest requesters for public records. But I think that it is such a big change that it would be susceptible to political attack from that avenue. So that makes me leery of it, and I would not want to pursue it in this legislative session without some sort of firm commitment from the government lobbyists that are saying they can't commit to it, that they wouldn't, try such shenanigans. I think the other thing Mark said that I found intriguing and that I think could accomplish a lot of what we're talking about is looking at the fee waiver provisions of existing law and making them mandatory. I know there has been, and I think the last two sessions, there has been an SPJ bill that has appeared in sort of different variations that would have accomplished that or would have done that to some degree or another. I think that's worth discussing. So I guess ultimately where I am is I think it's a good idea. I think it's a really good idea. I'm not ready to endorse it as the thing that we should do.
Because of
because of the politics, and because I think there are other ways of getting at the same.
Okay. We're a little bit over, Steve. Go ahead. Yeah. You're muted, Steve. No, you're still muted. There, now you're not muted. No. For some reason, we still can't hear you, though.
Now?
Yes, now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So, yeah, I agree, Todd, Michael, on the idea of waiver appeals being an area that's worth exploring no matter what. I just want to say, like, in terms of preserving the status quo in the sense of, like, it treats everybody the same and it's equitable and it's fair, that is not what's happening. I mean, the reality is fee for service model, which is the current situation, means that there's inequitable access to public records. And so I don't think we should kid ourselves in thinking that ignoring categories of requesters creates this, beautiful, equitable outcome. It doesn't.
Okay. Have people had a chance to look at that analysis about how much Oregon spends that Steve put together on records? About how much is actually brought in by records? I do think it would be informative to that, to just so we're all working from the same data here. So if you get a chance between the next time, we have reached time. So I think next time we will move forward and talk about waivers and other ways at getting at reducing costs, and just keep exploring it. We may return to categories, not finalizing any discussions here. Mark, did you have a final thought?
Yeah, I just want to echo both Scott and Tyler. This whole notion of categorization is not something that I'm saying no to. I just think that this is a big lift. This is a really big lift. It's changing an entire culture. I'm absolutely open to continued discussions about this. I didn't want to appear as though I've closed the door to this, but I think there's a lot of gardening to do before we can really have that conversation in a manner that's helpful. So thank you for that opportunity to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah, and just as I said, we're not setting it aside. We'll continue to keep that in the discussion, and because somehow these will all fit together, waivers and categories and what'd you keep calling it, Tyler? An itemized receipts. Yeah. Okay, so then that's it for now. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you. Oh, I guess I need a motion to adjourn. Our next meeting is the
16th.
September.
So moved.
Second.
Everybody in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
See y'all later.
Bye-bye.